Hello, I'm Rex Childhouse, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty easily, this video is being made on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. We own a Chevy Sonic 2013 Sonic LTZ, the turbocharged Sonic, and high mileage car. I'm being somewhat sarcastic. We've owned it for 10 and a half years now. We bought it late 2012 as a birthday present for my wife, and it's got 77,000 miles on it, so it gets less than 8,000 miles a year as an average. The shocks and the struts showing their wear and tear due to age and mileage, and replaced them recently. Did some YouTube research, found several individuals talking about how to do it, and then went at it. I will tell you, if you're doing the rear struts, it's pretty simple. There's two bolts that come out of the top to remove a bracket, one bolt that comes off the bottom to remove the shock itself. Take that assembly clear, remove the bolt from the top of the shock, put that bracket on the new shock, tighten it up, make sure it's a friction lock bolt. If not, put a jam nut on it. What the heck? Put it back in the car, and you're done. There's no issues with the back. It's pretty simple. The front, watched numerous YouTube videos, and I don't think any of them were complete, and this one here is probably not complete, but I am going to give you the tool list that I built from this, give you some hints and tips, and show you some still photos. I have no videos of this, and hopefully it'll help you along your way. It's not that hard. This is what I would refer to as iron mechanic work. There's no electronics, no electricity, don't have to open up your brake system, any of that stuff. Does require a fair amount of tools. It's actually a 1.5 person job, at least the way I did it. When one person handling the jack while you're setting it up, and I'll show you in the shots as we go where we come up with that. It's easier to have one person change the elevation of lower steering suspension arm while you're trying to align it. But the first side took me over 2 hours, and that was the time to jack up the car, take the wheels off, do something, find a new tool, do something else, find a new tool, do something else, find a new tool, whatever. It took me over 2 hours. And the replacements that I bought, I did not buy with springs, so I had to move the springs over. I borrowed a McPherson coil spring compressor from O'Reilly, which is a nice deal, no cost, and it worked really well. It took me over 2 hours to do the first one. It took me from the time I started the second one to the time the car was back on all four tires was less than 75 minutes. So it's a bit of a learning curve, and I'm going to cover that as we go. Let's look into the tool list, and let's look into the steps as we go, and I'll show you some still photos of this. This is not a hard task. I would recommend, if you're going to do this, spend the extra money, get the complete strut assembly with springs, unless you want some extra work, and I'll give you some clues on doing the extra work. My father's 100% Dutch, my mother was 100% Scottish. I'm conservative, so I'm not only cheap, I'm miserly. But it went together really well. It took me less than 3.5 hours from start to finish. Let's look at the details on this. This is our 2013 Chevy Sonic LTZ. It's turbocharged. My wife likes it. I think it's an inch too small in every direction. Gets decent gas mileage. I'm not totally impressed. This is the tool list that I wrote, I documented as I went through it, and had some, it's one of the things that took me, added my time to assembly. There are, and I'm going to talk about some steps in this or some tools in this as we go. You may not need them. like the 24mm offset box wrench, you might not need. Depends on how it's going to go with you, whatever else. It's 2 pages if you know how to screen print, shoot it with your smartphone, whatever. This will get you going. I do recommend, no, I don't recommend. It's my preference. When I jack up a car on my floor jacks, I prefer to leave the floor jacks underneath them. Even if I'm inserting jack stands, prefer to have the floor jacks available just in case. I have 3 floor jacks, so I put one under each side of the car. And I have numerous jack stands, one under each side of the car, and my 3rd floor jack handled the lower suspension arm to bear the weight and adjust the height. There are some interesting little items in here, brake-free WD-40, penetrating oil, whatever, to clean the bolts. As soon as you take the wheels off, spray those 2 lower bolts and the bolt on that brace or bracket. Take a rag, wipe them off. If you got a wire brush, you can get to them, maybe brush them off a little bit. Don't damage them. And then when you come back to them, spray them again. If you start to run them out 2-3 turns, run them back in, and then get that grid off and then take them off. They are friction locks, so they do come off tight. Hope this tool list helps you out. There's a lot on it, and that baling wire or safety wire is there. There's a bracket up in the wheel well to the back side of the shock strut that you can run the baling wire through, and then use that to hold the brake assembly from falling too far. There's foam seals that just pull these things out a little bit, and they'll clear the little cavity that's in the upper cowl seal. And then the upper cowl seal has, I think it's 4 plastic pins. Take a flat-bladed screwdriver, pull the top of the pin up, and then get your underneath the lower portion of the plastic pin, pull the whole pin out. If you happen to lose these or damage them, no big deal. Places like Harbor Freight sell these things in massive quantities. They're really cheap. On Amazon, I think about 100 of them for $7. They're somewhere out in my workshop. I can't find them. And in the very center of the upper cowl seal, you'll see that small rectangular box area. Pop that out with a thin screwdriver. There's a 7mm machine screw underneath that you need to remove to get that upper cowl seal to move. Once you get the upper cowl seal to move, don't yank it, don't pull it very far. You don't want to break it. You don't need to remove it. To remove it, you'd have to take the wipers off. Once you get it up, then there's 4 or 5 10mm machine screws or bolts for the lower cowl seal, and pull those out with a socket and ratchet, and then you can move that forward, and then you have free access, open access to the shock tower tops. When you do get to the shock tower tops, that plastic cap just pulls off. It's not threaded, just pull it off. That big area around the outside is the receiver cup, and it's metal reinforced. It's loose. It sits inside that cavity that you'll see when you get this open. Now you have to make a decision. And my question is, if you're replacing the struts, why do you care what shape the ram rods for the shocks are? So I recommend you take a pair of vice grips, go inside the wheel well, put the vice grips on the ram rod, and then use a normal ratchet deep socket to remove the nut off the top of the shock, to loosen the nut off the top. If you want to protect this and you do a reinstallation for some reason, you need a deep socket. You need that offset box wrench, which I found to not work real well, and you need a T50, and I used a 3-inch extension, 3/8 inch drive, T50 Torx T50 to hold the shock ram from rotating, and then used the offset box wrench to loosen that nut. That's a friction nut. It is tough to turn. It was not designed to be easy.
One of the videos says there's a $120 tool, I think, from GM to remove this. I will tell you that it was a fight with my offset wrench. I actually had to grind part of the offset wrench off to give me more clearance to get into here. Not a fun experience. Loosen this nut up, don't remove it. Loosen it up all the way up to the top if you want, so it can be turned with your fingers if you want, before you go down to the bottom. Down on the bottom, as I said, you want to spray these guys. There's one for the brace, and that's an 18 millimeter, and the center of it's a T40 Torx. And I used the same thing. I used my offset, 18 millimeter offset, to turn that nut, and used a 3-inch extension on a T40 Torx and 3/8 inch breaker bar to hold that and to loosen those up. I started to take them off before I sprayed brake free on them. I learned that was a mistake. And if you look in this photo, I backed the lower nuts off. They're 21 millimeter. You want to back those off to the point that there's no threads above the nut, and then you want to use your hand sludge and knock those bolts forward. The front of the car is to the right. We're on the right side of the car. You want to knock those bolts forward. They're splined. They are, and you'll see it in another photo. So you can't turn the bolt. All you can do is turn the nut. Pull the nut, rotate, take the nut out to the point that you're protecting the threads of the bolt. Take a hand sludge, hit them through. Don't smash them, just tap them. That's all it takes. Once you get the nut to be flush with the shock strut again, back it off 2-3 turns. Tap it back through until it's clear, and then you can take the nut off and use a 21 millimeter socket to pull the bolts out of the shock strut and the brake assembly. When you do that, I recommend you have that third floor jack underneath that lower arm to hold the weight. And at the same time, you should be taking that baling wire, safety wire, whatever you're going to use, and running it through the upper hole on that brake assembly to keep it from falling out, putting tension on that assembly. You can see in this photo too the wire for the brake sensors and the brake line, and take a flat-bladed screwdriver, push those out of their brackets. Once you've got the lower bolts out, the shock strut's hanging by that upper nut. Reach up, take that off with your fingers if you've loosened it to that point. Now manhandle it and get it out. As I said, I bought the replacement shocks without the springs, so I borrowed a McPherson spring compressor from O'Reilly. They don't charge. I appreciate that. And I took the springs off the old ones, put them on the new ones. I'm not going to get into detail on it, but there's a nut on top of this, which I think is a 22 millimeter nut. And after I compressed the spring, moved it over, there's a rubber buffer boot on the bottom of it. You take all of those over. I highly recommend you just buy the new one with the springs installed, and my puppy is bothering me, and make your job a lot easier. Not a good photo, but I used that brace bracket that's towards the back of the strut, shock strut, as it's mounted in the car, to hold it vertical in my vise, my machinist vise, and then it was really easy to compress those springs and transfer them over to the new assembly. In reassembling it, it went pretty easy. I put the shock strut up into place, put that receiver cup at the top, got the top of the ram through the receiver cup, and just spun the nut on it finger tight. It's a friction lock nut. It's a new nut. The old one that came off was 24 millimeter. The new one that came on, that went on, was 22 millimeter. I mic'd the ram. I mic'd or measured everything on this, and everything was identical except for that nut. And I went with the 22. It was a whole lot easier, especially since my 22 millimeter offset box wrench fit down and tightened it up really nice with the now a T40 Torx to hold the ram from rotating. So that worked out really nice. This is where that second person helps. You can see on the very bottom of the photo a little bit of orange on the right hand corner. That's my third floor jack. That was handling the elevation issues with the shock, with the shock strut, and my wife was adjusting the height up down so I could get the holes aligned, put the 2 alignment punches through, said okay fine, and at that point had those through, pulled one out, inserted the bolt, inserted one of those spline bolts, and just ran a nut on it, finger tight, pulled the other one out, inserted the lower bolt, which was really easy because they were aligned, finger tight, attached that brace in the back with that 18 millimeter and T40 Torx, snugged that down, and then went up to the top and with a T40 Torx 3-inch extension, 3/8 inch breaker bar to give me the room, and the 22 millimeter offset box wrench. Tightened the top, came back down. These are 21s if I remember right, and tightened these. And I ran each nut down, say 2 turns, then went to the other nut to work them through. Rather than pull one through all the time. Do not recommend using impact tools on these guys. I generally don't put things together with impact tools anyways, just my preference. Then you've got to slide, and I used the handles from the alignment wrench to push the rubber insulators on the wires and the brake hoses back in. On one side I used a large flat bladed screwdriver to push them in on the other side. Checked the tightness on all the bolts, put that cap back on the top of the shock tower to protect it from dust, and checked and made sure that everything was good, and said okay, I'm done. And at that point I had about 2.5 hours invested in the right installation. Part of the delay was take something off, go find the next tool, bring it back, write down on a list, then figure it out. I tried a couple of different ways to hold that shock strut assembly to take the spring off before I decided to go over to my machinist vise and hold it that way, and it worked really well. So the second strut came off the left side, really easy, no surprises, no additional. These struts are left and right. The right one has that flange for that brace on the back towards the rear of the car. The left one has it towards the rear of the car, so you're not going to get 2 of the same shock strut. It's one of each. One's left, one's right. They are very specific. They're not interchangeable. Took me less than 75 minutes to start removing the left side, to get it complete and the car back on the ground, and I was still taking my time, wasn't pushing anything. So I would say if you're dealing with a 3-hour time slot and you're working comfortably with pre-assembled tools, you got it made. There is no requirement to open any of the brake lines, to disconnect any electrical lines, unless you want to remove the battery negative terminal just for safety reasons. I'm not dealing with anything near electrical on this, so had a lot of fun with it. So as I said, there's numerous videos on YouTube on how to do this. Mine's probably missing a step. My tool list is probably missing a tool. I thought it was pretty easy. I did spend a lot of time, and it was a learning curve. One of the learning curves was, highly recommend you buy your assembly with the springs attached It just saves you a lot of time and a lot of trouble. If you are going to use a spring compressor, transfer the springs over, remember to lubricate the threads either with oil or grease on the spring compressor to make the job a little bit easier, and follow the instructions on your spring compressor. Most of them say turn them down left and right side, alternating half to 3/4 of a turn at a time. My really good spring compressor, I have no idea where it went. A friend borrowed it, and all of a sudden I think it became his. Should say an ex-friend borrowed it, and I think it became his. I actually enjoyed putting this thing together, taking this thing apart, putting it together. Accomplished something, felt good, found no surprises. The car runs really nice once you're done with this. The car rode different, stopped doing the wave after you hit a bump, so I think we did it good. Following the audio on this video, I'm going to let it run, is a printed steps, which if you want to screen print or follow when you have your smartphone or whatever at your working car, feel free to do so. Thanks for watching. Hope it helps you. I enjoyed doing it. Thanks. Bye.